That's right. You came to the right place. 39 books in less than 39 minutes. So, obviously, I am not going to go like, then we have Genesis. Genesis was written so-and-so by such and such, and it covers that. Instead, what I want to do is step back and take a look at the big picture. What is the plot of the Old Testament? What are the themes? How do the different pieces of the puzzle fit together? You see, in my experience, many, many, many Christians know that the Old Testament is important in some hard-to-define way. But when you get to the details, like, yeah, I know the Old Testament. Let me see, that's the one. Like, it starts with the garden, and then there's that big tower, and God doesn't like it, and there's a flood. Wait, is it the other way around? I can't really remember. And then there's the slavery and the bush and the miracles and the plague of the locusts. Can't forget the locusts. And then there's the wilderness and the clouds and the fire and wars, lots of wars and begatting. Did the begatting, probably because of all those concubines. And then there's all sorts of names I can't pronounce, and prophets doing weird things, and freaky visions, and
really, really old people.
Old people, like crazy old people. Then there's a break, and then Jesus comes and things get much more normal. And that's the relationship a lot of Christians have. We know like some of the stories, like, yeah, there's a short guy who fights the big guy. That was pretty cool. I like that one. What I want to do is help put all these pieces into a framework for you, so that the next time you find yourself lost in some Old Testament prophecy, you've got a map to navigate from. You've got a sense of how things fit together, because the Old Testament matters a lot. Paul told the Romans in Romans chapter 15, everything that was written in the past was written to teach us, so that through endurance and the encouragement of the Scriptures, we might have hope. Paul also told the Corinthians in 1 Corinthians 10, these things happened to them in the Old Testament as examples, and were written down as warnings for us, on whom the fulfillment of the ages has come. The Old Testament is meant to serve as a source of hope and encouragement, as a source of inspiration, and as a warning. We're supposed to be able to look into these stories and mine lessons for our lives today. But it can be hard. So how is it that God kicks off the Old Testament? Well, he starts with a bang, literally. Let there be light! And he creates the universe. The whole thing by a word. I mean, think about that. Have you ever been outside on a cold day and just breathed out? It's that little mist that evaporated? That's what this whole universe is to God. The universe starts by giving the Bible starts by giving us perspective on who God is. He is so huge that everything, trillions of light years away, to him. Then God looks down on one little blue ball in one little galaxy that he created, and he gazes on a little ocean. And on the eastern shore of the Mediterranean, he raises up a patch of land out of the water. And he makes it a paradise. He makes it a land for his people, and he puts his people there. And they live there with God, in God's presence, under God's rules. But then they make a mistake. They disobey. They rebel against God's very reasonable commands. And God evicts them from the land, from the garden, from the paradise, from Eden, symbolizing a removal from his presence. And their descendants have many misadventures. God ultimately destroys them with a flood and saves a remnant. And tells them to spread over the whole earth. They rebel again, and they stay in one place and they build a tower. They say, we will not be scattered. And so God scatters them through battle. And then, through their descendants, he seeks out one, Abram. And he says, go to a land that I will show you. So Abram starts walking. Along the way, his name gets changed to Abraham. And he arrives in this land, this paradise, this Eden, this promised place for God's people that God has brought him to. And then God appears to Abram in Genesis chapter 15, verse 12. As the sun was setting, Abram fell into a deep sleep, and a thick and dreadful darkness came over him. Then the Lord said to him, know for certain that your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own. They will be enslaved and mistreated for 400 years. But I will punish the nation they serve as slaves, and afterward they will come out with great possessions. You, however, will go to your fathers in peace and be buried at a good old age. In the fourth generation, your descendants will come back here, for the sin of the Amorites has not yet reached its full measure. important themes are being introduced here that we're going to see unpacked over the next few minutes as we survey the history of the Old Testament. So it did come to pass that Abram's descendants, Abraham's offspring, were living as slaves in Egypt for 400 years. It was around this time that a man named Hammurabi, who you may have heard of, created his famous laws. And God left them there. They cried out, Lord, deliver us, save us, take us from this place. Restore us to your presence. Restore us to your favor. Restore us to the land you gave to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. But he delayed because the sin of the Amorites had not yet reached the place where it merited divine punishment. But then that time came. And so God called a man named Moses. Moses, said the bush, I am who I am. Go to Pharaoh and say, let my people go. And he went, and Pharaoh said, no, I will not let you go. And then a conflict ensued between one of the greatest civilizations on the planet and a shepherd who was suspected of murder, guilty of murder. But he had God on his side. And God faced down the great gods of Egypt. In their areas of expertise and strength, the plagues trumped over them. And then Pharaoh let the people go. They fled through the water. And you know the big whale fin passed out? No, that was just a movie. And they passed to the other side. Pharaoh's army was drowned as they tried to pursue and betray them. And they came out with great wealth, exactly as God had promised. And they began to wander in the wilderness. And God said to Moses, listen, these people are to be my people and to be in my place. They must know my policies. And so he called Moses up onto the mountain, and he gave him the law, the rules. And the law had several important aspects to it. One was the standard of righteousness, what it would take to remain in God's land and to not be evicted, as so many had been previously from God's presence. And number two, what to do when you made a mistake. And it was all about sacrifice. That when you sin, there must be blood. There must be sacrifice, literal sacrifice of animals. And it was to teach them an important lesson that sin kills. Sin destroys life. And you will see it enacted out before you as a living metaphor every time you go to temple. You must kill an animal. Imagine if every time you told a lie to your parents, they made you kill your puppy. That would drive home to you the seriousness of sin in a unique way. And so the Israelites learned for a season. But then their hearts grew hard. They got acclimated to it. They grew routine. They arrived in the promised land. They went in and they were God's agents of vengeance on the people of that land. And they drove them out. Except for a few. They hung out with them. They liked them. They kind of liked certain aspects of the worship they had. They had temple prostitutes. Hey, booyah. They ate foods that we weren't allowed to eat. They looked pretty good. They had different moral laws that, they were kind of fun. And the people of Israel found themselves slipping away from the worship of God in His own land, in His presence, into idolatry. And so God allowed other nations to come punish them. This is in the period of the Judges. You read about the Philistines and the other ones who came against Israel and oppressed them whenever they fell into sin. Then God would raise up a leader for them. Samson, Deborah, Gideon. And they would fight against the invaders as the people repented, and they'd be restored into a right relationship with God in God's land. It's about this same time that the Mayan culture is arising just south of us, as they are struggling to figure out what it means to be God's people in God's presence. At the same time, the young lady named Ruth returns from a poverty-stricken land and marries a man named Boaz. And Samuel, the last of the judges and the first of the prophets, arrives on the scene. In some ways, the first of the prophets. Moses was a prophet too. God's people are getting very frustrated with this cycle. Oppression, deliverance, oppression, deliverance, oppression, deliverance. So they analyze their history, and they come to the exact wrong conclusion. The problem is not our sinfulness. No, the problem is we don't have a king and a standing army. Give us a king, God. God says, you don't need a king. I am a king, and I'm better than all the armies in the world. We want a king. And God does for them what He so often does for us. He gives them what they want. Fine, you want a king? You get a king. And they got a big strapping king too. They got Saul. He was tall, he was good looking. He'd be a presidential candidate today. He's walking along, he's got the big armor. He's awesome. Except, he's flawed, deeply. He disobeys God. So God removes the kingship from him. And he gives it to a man named David. Oh, David. The most majestic of the Israelite kings. David was the man. He, I like to call a Jewish samurai. Because he's got that whole warrior poet thing going on. I mean, think about it. This is about 1000 BC. We are still reading his poems 3,000 years later. You know. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death,
I will fear no evil.
How many other 3,000-year-old poems do you have memorized? He was the man! And the ladies liked it. He had that whole bad boy thing going on. You know, yes, I can kill a giant with a slingshot. And your daddy doesn't like me. And he's got that, and I will write poems that will endure for 3,000 years. And he's rich. Now, he is short, but they overlooked that because he could dance in public. And so, David had it going on. However, David, too, was flawed. Fatally flawed. At least fatally for a man named Uriah the Hittite. And David betrayed and had murdered so that he could sleep with his wife. So because he had slept with his wife, he could cover it up. And so, the cycle of flawed kings began. Solomon came along. Now, Solomon was a lot smarter than his dad. A lot smarter than his dad. And he had so much potential. But he wasn't as good of a leader as his dad. And in some ways, he screwed up worse than his dad. Because there are some sins that smart people are very, very prone to commit. Stanford students, you would do well to remember that smartness is not insulation against stupidity. Particularly not against folly. And Solomon gave us some of the greatest passages in the Bible. Wrote much of the wisdom literature, or was responsible for its creation through his assimilation of Proverbs and collection of wise sayings. And then at his death, the kingdom split. The north and the south, civil war broke out. And then is when all the stuff that we really get confused about in the Old Testament happens, where the kings and the begat and so and reigned for so many years, and you've got different books that tell the same stories from different sides. You've got 1st, 2nd Kings, 1st, 2nd Chronicles. And the bottom line is, there were a few good kings and a lot of bad kings. And this is when the prophets began to operate in Israel. This is when you had people like Isaiah and Jonah and Amos and Hosea and Micah floating around. And they're saying, this is a bad trend that we are on. We are not headed in the right direction. We run the risk of being expelled from the land. Which symbolizes being in God's presence and enjoying God's favor. The people didn't listen. And in 605 BC, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And he destroyed it. And he took away the articles from the temple, which Solomon had built, the first temple. He took away a young man named Daniel. Jeremiah's heart was broken and he wrote Lamentations. And Daniel found himself with his friends in a foreign land, speaking a new language. Not being in the place that symbolized God's presence anymore, but learning something new about God. That God was everywhere. And that God was with him in the midst of his captivity. And God used Daniel to do great things. To accomplish amazing, amazing, amazing feats for him. At the same time that Daniel is being assimilated into the Babylonian Empire and to its leadership culture, the Babylonian Empire is overthrown by the Persian Empire. Now, you've studied the Persians. Some in high school, probably some in college. You've heard about them. One of the chief Persian emperors that is relevant for our discussion tonight is a man named Cyrus. God liked Cyrus a lot. God frequently likes people who aren't part of his people. God's got a love for the whole world, a boundless love. And he had actually prophesied about Cyrus through the Israelite prophets. Now, Cyrus was a Zoroastrian, as best as we can determine from history. If you're not familiar with the Zoroastrians, they were the other great monotheistic religion of the Middle East. And the only one that's really been pretty much eradicated. There's a couple of Zoroastrians left. But if you meet one, put it in your diary. It's a big deal. They've been mostly eradicated. But because he was monotheistic, and because the Persians were monotheistic, they seemed to have a special kinship with the Jewish people and were more open to what the Jews had to say than many other ancient empires were. This is one of the reasons why you read this and you're like, how are the Jews having such influence over these crazy emperors? Because they too believed in one God. And they thought the Jews must serve him too. So they listened to the prophets of the Jews, more so than many other emperors were prone to do. Little mystery resolved for you right there. Cyrus heard that he had been prophesied to be instrumental in the rebuilding of the temple that had been destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar. So he commissions Ezra to go and rebuild the temple. Ezra goes back, begins rebuilding the temple, the second temple. As is the way of empires, things change. Along comes a man named Xerxes. He marries a smoking hot Jewish gal named Esther, who wins a nationwide, emperor-wide beauty pageant. Things go great there. Esther saves Jewish people. Then Xerxes decides, you know what, I'm going to invade Greece. So he goes. The movie The 300 takes place. Yes, that guy. And he goes back. And then empires change again. Not empires change, but emperors change again. Artaxerxes comes along. Artaxerxes ultimately sends Nehemiah and begins rebuilding the nation itself. The capital of Jerusalem, not just the second temple, but also the place that God's people are sort of headquartered, and begins repatriating them slowly. It's around this time that a lot of the short, confusing prophets occurred. You've got your, I was going to say Amos, but that's not quite right. You've got Haggai, Zechariah, Obadiah, Joel. They're all functioning right around here. This is around the same time that Socrates is stirring up trouble in Athens. Then, a guy named Malachi comes along, puts the period in the New Testament. That's the flow. That's the rhythm. That's the way that things fit together. The prophets are all speaking to specific situations, and if you understand the plot line, you can make a little bit more sense out of what they're saying. Now, looking at this flow, this story, what are the big picture lessons in a marriage? Well, there's a lot. There are 900-page books written about the Old Testament that are trying to deal with just this one question. There are 4 themes I want to hone in on tonight. Not necessarily the only themes, or even the most important themes, but the ones that I think are most germane to us tonight here at Stanford. The first thing that the Old Testament teaches very, very clearly: God is in control. God is sovereign over the affairs of mortals, over the affairs of nations, and over each individual. He is the king. It's not just a metaphor. Well, yeah, it's a metaphor. He doesn't sit on a throne and have a little crown, but it is a profound metaphor for the reality of God's rule and God's influence. Even nations that do not honor God are pawns in his hand. God used the Babylonians to punish Israel, just as he used Israel to punish the Amorites. God is in control. God's in control of your life and of your future. Now that should be reassuring to you. Here at Stanford, you got a lot of things to stress about. You got a lot of things to worry about. How many units am I going to take? That's a big question for a lot of you right now. You're like, well, will it be 19 or 20? I don't know. Lord, speak to me. Wrong question! In the Old Testament, one of the most profound expressions of trust in God's control is a principle called Sabbath. God was speaking to farmers, agrarian people, and he said, one day in 7, I don't want you to do any work. Now, have you ever been on a farm? There's always work to do on a farm. Your task list is never checked off completely. There's always stuff to do. God says, I want you to stop. And if you trust me, I'll take care of you. Take care of your farm. You'll have the produce you need. You'll have your cows will have the offspring maybe. They'll produce the milk that you need. Just trust me. One day in 7. Don't do work. Most of us in this room are scheduling our lives in such a way that that is not even possible for us. To take a break and to place trust in God. And say, you know what, God? I'm going to back off from my to-do list. I'm just going to spend some time relaxing, and praying, worshiping, and not stressing. But I will take your easy yoke and your light burden upon me. I would challenge you. This word is not for every one of you. There are seasons where God has a plan for you that involves you taking a lot of units. But not as many of you as do that. And in this period of shopping, before your schedule is finalized, ask yourself, why am I taking this class? Is it to impress someone? My parents, a sibling who maybe graduated from Stanford already and who I have to show off to or show up? Or a friend who I'm in sort of a competition with, whether or not they know it? Or to prove something to myself? Or is it because this class, I believe, will serve God's purposes in my life and prepare me for what I think He's calling me to do? If you ask that question, you just might find yourself taking a few less courses and having more free time and enjoying college more. And here's a shocker, actually learning more that matters. I remember far more from college of what I did not learn in my classes than any of the particular facts I accumulated in a given course. It's the in-between stuff that sticks with you. Have some in-between time so it can stick. Second thing that I see in the Old Testament that's huge, God keeps His promises. This is stupendous. I mean, God keeps His promises to people. I mean, when you were a kid growing up, every adult did not keep their promise to you. Why? They didn't have to. They were grown up. They just say, yeah, sure, you can have some candy when you get home. And then they wouldn't give it to you. They didn't mean it or they forget. God remembers and He keeps His promises. God promised to Abram, I'll give this land to your descendants. They got it. God said to Abram, through you all the nations of the world will be blessed. Really? Everyone on the whole earth? Yeah. And today we see it to be so. God said to Moses, I will set my people free. But the most powerful empire on the planet says no. But I say yes, and I'm God. None can gainsay me. God keeps His promises. What's the takeaway for us? He's going to keep His promises to us too. The New Testament calls them His very great and precious promises. What are they? It would take too long to list them all, but here's some. God promises us hope in a troubled world. He promises us peace in times of stress. He promises us freedom from sin's grip on our lives and forgiveness for transgressions that we have committed. These are promises that we have from God. He promises us purpose and destiny and significance if we rely on Him. And God is a promise-keeping God. The Old Testament was given to us as an example, so that through these scriptures we might have encouragement. Be encouraged. God keeps His promises. Learn them and rest in them. The third thing we learn from the Old Testament, one of the many things we learn from the Old Testament, is that sin kills. Sin brings death. We see it both in the sacrificial system that is reenacted over and over and over again, and in the way that God brings cosmic judgment so many times in the Old Testament, plagues and wars. I mean, this is where the word smiting comes about. Sin kills. And God acted so vigorously in the Old Testament to show us how seriously He still takes it today. He's not dropping a lot of that around us. But His fundamental feelings have not changed. And if we are wise, as Paul said, we will take the warning and internalize it. And we will not be so cavalier with the Holy God. And so we will not just take for granted the pride that is growing in our heart. That will be our undoing, because pride goes before a fall. Lying and deception, boasting, pornography, bitterness, losing control from drunkenness. All these things that the Bible clearly labels sin. That become so easy to accept as a normal part of life here at Stanford. Because, hey, I'm doing better than the guy next door. That's not the standard. The standard is the one that got Adam and Eve thrown out of Eden. One act of disobedience. God calls us to be holy. That's frightening. Because none of us can be that good. Abraham wasn't that good. She's my sister, really, yo, check it out. Moses wasn't that good. I would kill him. I did. Moses was not allowed to enter the promised land because he struck a rock. God said, speak to the rock. Moses hit it with a staff, and God said, that's it. No promised land for you. David, a man of God's own heart, was punished for his murder and adultery. These great paragons of faith that we're still talking about thousands of years later couldn't do it. We can't either. That's frightening for life. Because the fourth great thing we learn from the Old Testament is that God is the judge. God not only looks at sin and recognizes that sin kills and gives us rules to protect us from it because of its natural consequences, he's more than just a describer of the natural outworking of events. He's an enforcer. And when we do wrong, he holds us to account. When we tell a lie to someone else and hurt them, that pain is on our balance sheet, and God will pay it back to us one day. Exodus chapter 34. It says, the Lord, the compassionate and gracious God. Wait. Oh, yes. The Lord, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness, maintaining love to thousands, and forgiving wickedness, rebellion, and sin. Yet, he does not leave the guilty unpunished. Does not leave. He forgives wickedness, rebellion, and sin. Does not leave the guilty unpunished. Isn't that like contradictory? Yeah, it is. If he both forgives the same person and punishes the same person. And this is one of the most magnificent things about the Old Testament. It's the Old Testament. It's part one. It's a two-part play. Along comes a man named Jesus, and he fulfills the promises implicit in the Old Testament that allow God to both punish and forgive. In the words of Isaiah, chapter 53, surely he took up our infirmities and carried our sorrows. We considered him stricken by God, smitten by him, and afflicted. I'm reading from a different translation. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was upon him, and by his wounds we are healed. We all like sheep have gone astray. Each of us has turned to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. You cannot understand the Old Testament apart from Jesus. Without the New Testament, without the story of Jesus coming, living a sinless life, and dying on the cross on our behalf, in our place, so that God could forgive the wicked, us, me and you, and yet bring punishment. Jesus stood in the gap for us. He took the fall for us. Without that, the Old Testament's like a puzzle with one piece missing. It's like one of those heart lockets that's broken in half without the other piece. You can't see the message of love. You just see the scratchy part that hurts. But it's not automatic. We all, like sheep, have gone astray, but not each of us has allowed our iniquity to be placed upon him, has allowed him to stand in for us. This quarter, you have a tremendous opportunity to get a fresh start with God, to experience the new life that Jesus brings, to experience his freedom, his hope, his peace, and his forgiveness. And tonight, I invite you to pray to God and to say simply, Father, there's a lot that still confuses me, but I have done a lot of wrongs. And if you really are a judge, I'm guilty. Forgive me. Somehow help me out through Jesus. And I'll follow you with your help. You can pray that with a pure heart. God makes another promise. One he will keep. That he will send his Holy Spirit to transform you from the inside out. And I promise you, you will embark on a wild ride that you will enjoy for many years to come. I invite you now to stand and join me in prayer. And then the worship team is going to sing this song.